Hello and welcome back to the fourth day of EuRIC. I'm really happy to have you all back with me and to introduce to you our next webinar, which is from EuRIC, who have hosted a recyclers talk all about how to make textiles circular. So they've got a few experts together, and for you, I've got it all ready right now. So let's dive in there. So good to have you all back, and let's go.
Hello and welcome to this event on textiles and the circular economy organised by EuRIC, the European Recycling Industries Confederation. I'm Kira Taylor, a journalist at EuRactiv, and I'll be moderating this event on how the textiles industry can become circular and sustainable. This Recyclers talk is the second in a series of webinars on the circular economy. Make sure to follow EuRIC's website and social media for more information on their upcoming events. Unfortunately, Jan Hutima, who is due to give our closing statement, is not able to make it, but that gives us more time to get into your Q&A questions later. Today's event will be recorded and made available to the public as part of ERAC, the Digital Recycling Expo and Conference for Circular Economy and Waste Management. You can watch the recording on the 7th of May, or it will be available on YouTube afterward. Keep an eye on EuRIC's social media for the link. Today's event is also part of the EU Green Week. Now, textiles and clothing are essential for our everyday lives, but they can have a huge environmental impact. Over the last 2 decades, consumption of textiles has drastically changed, particularly the quick turnover of cheap and fast fashion. They are the 4th largest global contributor to resource use and greenhouse gas emissions. EU consumers discard 11 kilograms of textiles per person every year, but recycling rates are extremely low. In 2019, the Commission identified textiles as a priority product category for the circular economy. Textile production also uses a large amount of chemicals, and it is estimated that 20% of water pollution is caused by dyes and finishing textiles. But reducing the pressures from textile production and the rate of consumption requires a systematic change in the industry. We'll be looking more into that in our Q&A debate later. You can join in by sending your questions for our panelists. For that, please use the Q&A box on the right of your screen, choosing the All Panelists option. Please also make sure to indicate the speaker to whom your question is addressed. But first, to kick off our event today, we have 3 keynote speakers. The first is Mariska Zonvliet, President of EuRIC Textiles. Ms. Zonvliet is the co-owner and corporate communications executive of Burr Group, one of the largest textile reuse and recycling companies in Europe. They sort and collect over 110 million kilos of post-consumer textiles each year to prepare for reuse and recycling. Since 2019, she has also represented the textile recycling industry as President of EuRIC Textiles and in the presidency of the Dutch Association for Textile Reuse and Recycling. Ms. Zonvliet, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kira, for that introduction. Good morning and welcome everyone to our Recyclers talk today with the topic textiles. I would like to extend a special welcome to Maria Rincon, who is joining us from the Commission, and also my fellow panelists, Jonas and Valeria, who will help me to answer all of your burning questions later this morning. Today we are going to what is needed to make textiles circular. But I'd like to start just shortly by explaining why we need to make textiles circular. As Kira already said, textiles and clothing are an essential part of our daily lives, and we have been buying more and more over the last 2 decades. Currently, over 150 billion garments flood the earth every year, and we often don't realize that it has a huge impact on the environment to produce them. Just to give an example, it takes over 10,000 liters of water to produce a single pair of jeans. Not to speak of CO2 emissions. When you look at the textile production industry, that CO2 emission is in fact higher than aviation and shipping combined. In other words, if we want to save the planet for our future generations, we need to reuse, recycle, and in the end, make textiles circular now. However, what is needed to make this transition? It's easily said than done. It all starts with a separate collection of textiles from the household waste. Currently, it's estimated in 2019, 2.8 million kilos were collected separately within the EU. In 2025, we will have a mandatory separate collection system in each EU member state, and estimates are that the volume of separately collected textiles may go up to 5.5 million tons. This is a huge amount of textiles, a huge volume, and we need to start by handling that properly, separately collecting it so that we can retain the value which is inside the textiles. What we find inside textile bins nowadays, Kira was already explaining, our company sorts 100 million kilos every year, is a great diversity. It is not just textile items that you find in the textile bin. It is basically anything and everything the consumer finds is a little bit like textiles that they will put in the bin. So it also includes shoes, accessories, belts, toys, you name it. So what is essential after the textiles have been separately collected is that there is an item-based sorting that takes place. Every item, whether it be textiles or shoes or an accessory that is fit to be reused, should be reused. Reuse is by far the best way of recycling at the moment, as it has the least environmental impact. So sorting for reuse is essential there, and this sorting has to meet the worldwide demand for secondhand textiles and clothing. This demand is huge. I really want to stress that there's a huge global demand for secondhand clothing. Nearly 70% of the world population is in need of secondhand clothes. But an item is only reusable when it's also marketed in the right way. So this is why sorting by well-trained and knowledgeable sorters is essential. Textiles and clothing are extremely suited for prolonged use and reuse when their design is durable. This is one of the main calls from EuRIC Textiles as well. That is a call for durable production of textiles. So in the design, it's kept account with that the clothes or the textiles can be worn or used again as long as possible. This is also following, of course, the steps in the waste hierarchy. When we look at tackling the problem of the growing textile waste, then we have to start by reusing. Of course, there are also currently items in the textile bin that are no longer fit to be reused or reworn because they're either too dirty or worn out or just not fit. This accounts for currently 30%, and this is going for material recovery. In the current situation, that is mainly production for wipers and mechanical recycling, where the textiles are shredded onto a fiber level and then used again in, for instance, insulation materials and car parts. Currently, at the moment, less than 1% is actually fiber to fiber. And with fiber to fiber, we are talking about fibers that can be used again as raw materials in new clothing. This percentage is way too low, and in fact, that is where our true challenge lies for the future. So why is this so low? It has to do, in effect, with two things. One, it's technically complicated to recycle textiles. I think we will go further into that during our panel discussion. And two, it is very costly. Recycling, even the mechanical recycling, costs money, and it costs more money than it actually brings money. So what is needed is that we have an end market for recycled content, for recycled fibers, that there is not only a willingness on the producer side to use recycled fibers, but also the ability to pay for that. And the problem is also that there is a huge financial gap at the moment between recycled material and virgin material. And we need to close this gap. This is really essential if we are to move from a linear to a circular system in textiles. To do that, policy is needed. EPR framework is very, very useful there. Of course, the quality has to be improved, but in the end, it's about closing this financial gap. Our ultimate goal is upcycling. But we must remember that we are in a global marketplace. So we need all stakeholders in the textile chain to be involved. We need not only to consider what is needed to make textile circular, but also who is needed. So from my point of view, it is also very important that we are in constant dialogue with each other, with the weavers, with the spinners, with the manufacturers, with the brands, with the fashion industry. So we can tell them from our point of view what we find at the end of the life cycle of the textiles, but they also need to tell us what is needed and what they are willing to, again, buy from us to make it economically interesting to recycle textiles. To stop here, because we have quite a full program this morning, and I'm sure a lot of questions, which I look forward to answering. So I thank you now for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Lumley. A really useful overview of the challenge, but also maybe how we can overcome it. Next, we're going to hear from Maria Rincon-Liavana. She has been working on circular economy policies for the past 5 years and currently holds the position of team leader for circular economy within the unit in charge of the implementation of the Circular Economy Action Plan in the European Commission's Directorate General for the Environment. She also works in the field of circular economy and textiles, and is keen on exchanging best practices in the area of sustainable consumption and production. Ms. Rincon-Liavana, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mariska, because you indeed did a very good overview of why we need to act and why it's so important moving towards circularity in the field of textiles. I wanted to thank as well the invitation to take part in these recycle talks and on a topic that is as relevant as this one. And I'm very glad to be able to hear directly and from those in the value chain that really need to make sure that we close the loop, that are recyclers. As you already mentioned, I think textile were identified first in the European Green Deal. That is the Sustainable Growth Agenda for Europe. But after the commitment was reiterated in the Circular Economy Action Plan for a More Competitive Europe, that identifies key product value chain, textile among them. Why textiles? I think we also need to look into the economic necessity to increase the sustainability of textiles. This is one of the major benefits that brings the circular economy. It's a joint agenda to ensure that the protection of the environment goes hand in hand with increasing competitiveness. And we cannot forget that the textile sector has been severely hit by the COVID crisis, and we should not only look at the economic crisis. Waiting in the background are 3 interrelated environmental challenges: climate, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Zooming into the economic and the competitiveness reasons to act, let me remind you that the textile and clothing industry is a significant sector for the EU economy, employs more than 1.5 million people in the EU, and produces a turnover of around 160 billion. Even if we see that we are starting to see some incipient recovery signals in the sectors. The COVID was hard for the producers of textiles, and has been estimated that in 2020 production and retail sales of clothing dropped by 15% and 9% respectively. And looking as regard of the environmental concerns that have been already shared by Mariska, the main concern is that it still operates in a mostly linear way. A vast amount of resources are extracted to produce items that are used for a very short period of time and then thrown away. On average, Europeans consumes, according to the European Environmental Agency, 26 kilograms of textiles per person per year, and the resources they contain are discarded and after wasted. The linear model that is producing, consuming, and throwing away textile generate environmental impacts such as climate impact. Mariska mentioned that it has been estimated that the impact of the global apparel industry is to be higher than all international flights and maritime shipping combined, pre-COVID scenario, of course, that the it's not a surprise for anyone in this webinar that the presence of substances of concern hampers the quality of recycling and at the same time pollutes water and soil. And then most importantly as well, we should not forget that 500,000 tons of microfibers from washing and synthetics are released in the ocean every year. But I want to remain in the positive angle. There are untapped opportunities from these economic and environmental challenges. And the Green Deal, the European Green Deal and the Circular Economy Action Plan offers instruments to transform these challenges into opportunities. Very briefly, and to set a little bit the ground for the discussion that will take place in the panel after, the circular economy is an economic model where the value of material and products is kept in the economy for as long as possible. And I agree with the title of this event and with the objective of this event, that is to explore what is required to move towards a circular economy. And indeed, it requires a systemic transformation. And there are three main building blocks that I consider essential to ensure that this systemic transformation takes the textile sector towards circularity, that builds a long-term vision. First of all, design. We need to act at the very beginning of the life cycle. Just as an example, the choice of materials and the design influence environmental and climate impacts and the end-of-life options available. It allows to plan for longer lifetime, for instance, by avoiding shirking or color loss. It allows for planning increased recyclability, for instance, by avoiding certain combination of materials. And most importantly, allows for planning for reducing pollution and microplastic release. The shift towards looking at the end of life cycle to really reduce waste generation towards starting to act at the beginning of the life cycle is a key component of the new Circular Economy Action Plan that was adopted by the Commission a year ago. And this Circular Economy Action Plan announces that the Commission will present a sustainable product legislative initiative by the end of this year. This legislative initiative, its aim at setting up principled and designed requirements to make all products in the European Union sustainable, so to make green products the norm. This is the framework for textiles to operate, and since the action plan already identifies the priority sector to which it will be applied, it's a little bit too early for me to be definitive on the scope. The preparations for this legislative initiative are ongoing, and the open public consultation to gather the views from all the stakeholders will remain open until the 9th of June. So I warmly encourage you to contribute. But it's not only looking at design, it's also to promote sustainable lifestyles. And for that, we need to provide consumers with better information on the environmental impacts of the product they purchase, but also we need to provide them with alternatives to fight the linear model, either by tackling false green claims, either identifying textile with a low environmental impact, for instance, through the EU Eco label. There's another angle that is has potential to really boost the change for sustainable lifestyle, that is new business models and online platforms that will enable citizens to share second-hand clothing or determine and personalize the design of clothing. This angle will be looked at as well in the context of the Sustainable Product Legislative Initiative to ensure that consumers receive information that is accurate on product, for instance, on the durability or reparability. The Commission is preparing a legislative proposal to empower consumers. The Commission is also preparing another proposal to request companies that want to put on the market a product with an environmental claim, that this environmental claim is substantiated on the basis of harmonized life cycle assessments. In this case, product environmental footprint and organization environmental footprint. And I know that the textile sector, apparel sector, is working on the establishment of product category for product environmental footprint for apparel. That is ongoing work currently in the making. As Mariska also mentioned, and I would expect to have more discussion on this during the panel discussion, for this transformation to happen, first prevention and then recycling of waste play a key role. We should not forget that the Commission already put on the table an ambitious revision of the waste framework legislation that was adopted by the co-legislator in 2018. And we are now in the process of implementing it together with member states and with the stakeholders. Just to give you some example of the provisions that were included in this revision of the waste framework legislation that can have an impact on textile. For instance, member states will be required to take measures to encourage reuse of products and encourage to set up systems for promoting repair and reuse activities, in particular for textiles. Mariska already mentioned the upcoming legal obligation to separately collect textile that will enter into force at the beginning of 2025. This could be a major game changer towards circularity, but it will require that industry, public authorities, and citizens work together. The increase of volume of textile collected thanks to the establishment of this legal obligation has the potential to as well boost markets for recycled materials. Why? Because it will push the market to put forward new technologies and to set up new innovative recycling infrastructures. And then for the uptake of these recycled material markets, it will be also important to rely on information sharing, either on the chemical or fiber composition. And for that, the digital product passport has potential as well to bring more clarity on the fiber composition and the chemical composition. This is something as well that will be established in the context of the Sustainable Product Legislative Initiative I mentioned before. It's a very heavy agenda. It's a transformative agenda. We need to ensure that the right enablers are put forward to ensure that this transformation is inclusive and bring together industry, consumers, public authorities across Europe. We should not forget that the textile sector has a strong international dimension, and European producers should work within transparent value chains, and they should be able to trace back the life of materials and components of these products. There's ongoing work on a legislative proposal on corporate sustainability governance that is upcoming in the next month that will set up this horizontal due diligence duty for environmental impact as well for social impacts. We will need to see how this integrates with textile global value chains to bring clarity and transparency along the value chains. The EU also engaged on international cooperation and partnerships that will help to mainstream these sustainable consumption and production patterns, including in terms of land and water use and the use of chemicals. A strong pillar that we should keep in mind: investments, financing, bridging the gap that Mariska was already mentioning, and that it will help to address some of the challenges that the recycling industry is facing right now in order to set up these technologies, this infrastructure to make sure textiles are recycled and transforming high quality secondary materials. The staff working document accompanies the recovery plan already identified some of these investment needs and the potential of next generation EU as well as the reinforced EU budget is there. It will unleash the necessary liquidity to support production processes, but also design the development of new materials, the establishment of new business model, as well as infrastructure and capacity for reuse and recycling. I would like to conclude that I'm really looking forward to this exchange of views later, because we really need to explore in depth the challenges and barriers the stakeholders along the value chain for textile are facing. But also I would like to hear where do we see together the potential for the future lies in design, in investments, in collaboration along the value chain. The Circular Economy Action Plan and the Green Deal set the ground on how to bring textile sector to circularity, announces a comprehensive strategy to bring together these elements, to set up a clear framework. The public consultation activities are going to be launched, and I would like to hear from this panel discussion what do we need to set up or to include in this comprehensive framework to bring textiles together towards circularity. Thank you very much, and I give the floor to Kira.
Thank you, Ms. Rincon-Ivana, and it's good to hear what the Commission are doing, but also how we need to support consumers to be able to shop sustainably, because there is so much fast fashion and not always that good labelling. Now, both you and Ms. Sonfleet will be joining us for our Q&A session later on. So please, to our audience, keep those questions coming in. We will try to get through as many as possible. Please make sure you are using the Q&A box right to the right of your screen, using the All Panelists option, and make sure to say who your question is addressed to. First, though, let's hear from our final speaker, Delara Burkhardt. She is a member of the European Parliament for the Social Democratic Party of Germany, and in 2019 became the youngest German MEP. A member of the Environment Committee, she works mainly on climate and biodiversity protection and also the circular economy. She is currently working on introducing European rules for deforestation-free supply chains and is rapporteur for the issue. Ms. Burkhardt, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Also inviting me on giving a keynote on this important topic. Not directly linked to my activities in deforestation, though, but we are really working and building bridges within the European Parliament to have a holistic approach also while policy making when it comes to the textile sector, as we work together with MEPs from all committees, from the trade to the environmental impact, to have this holistic approach and also deliver a good input for the Commission when it comes to the holistic textile strategy. So talking in general about textiles, whether clothing, but other products, they are actually our second skin. They surround us every day. They surround us everywhere. And today, it has already been mentioned, the fashion industry is mostly unsustainable and is not part of a holistic circular economy yet. So the one important landmark where you can see this is that the fashion industry has introduced more collections than there are seasons in a year, and clothing sales have been clearly decoupled from demand a lot. So the number of garments that produced annually has doubled since 2000, while the quality of our clothes is getting worse and worse and being far away from anything that we could call ready for circular economy. Less than 1% of textiles, it has been mentioned already, are currently processed into new textiles. So thus, we are not only wasting resources, the valuable raw materials we are using for textiles, they are actually lost. And this is something that has to end. From 2025, used clothing and other textiles are to be collected separately throughout Europe to facilitate reuse and high quality recycling. But is this alone enough to meet all the requirements and challenges? Certainly, this won't be enough. And it has been mentioned that the whole supply chain has to be looked at. But also we have seen, talking now from an environmental perspective, with the rise of the fast fashion industry, we have seen a boom of synthetic fibers that has occurred, and today more than 60% of textiles are produced out of synthetics, most as well of polyester. The worse the quality of our clothes becomes, and I'm talking to expert here, so the worse the quality of our clothes becomes, the more difficult it is to recycle. So we need to start focusing on the design process. The Green Deal is, it has been mentioned already, Europe's model for sustainable development, designed to bring together environmental, social, and economic sustainability, and also to guide Europe's economic recovery from the COVID crisis. So the constant downward pressure on social and environmental standards is leading to more and more social inequalities and environmental devastation. The circular economy in that way also must play a major part in managing the transition towards a social, economic, and environmental sustainable lifestyle, as it has been mentioned. The Green Deal has, however, a different angle of solutions and delivers certain answers with the Circular Economy Action Plan, which has been published earlier last year, just before the global pandemic reached Europe. And it already has also been mentioned that the worldwide pandemic has just shown us in a very dramatic way how important it is that we need a systematic shift, especially in the textile supply chains. But we are not talking about cherry picking and choosing certain sectors. Global consumption of materials such as biomass, fossil fuels, minerals are to double in the next 40 years, while annual waste generation is projected to increase by 70% by 2050. So what we want to do with this holistic circular economy approach is to recycle waste to obtain raw materials and also make sure that products are designed to last and can be reused and recycled in order to have a higher value in their entire life cycle. It is clear that if we raise our recycling targets and we create the conditionalities for high quality recycling system, we will obtain raw materials that instead of ending up in a landfill, they will enter the cycle and market. This means, and this is a systematic shift, that waste has a value. The waste is not a burden anymore, but becomes an economic asset. And if it's an economic asset, it means that it will pay more attention, that we will pay more attention to it, both when we recycle and at home, but also when companies begin their manufacturing process. And this means that we will create new jobs and create economic value. Europe must move to a circular model of production and consumption that respects our planetary limits. And there is where the cycle comes back to the clothing. A world without clothing won't be possible. We need a holistic approach on circular economy to reduce the environmental and climate impact of textile production and consumption. We need effective action in the areas of materials, fabrics, design, production, distribution, use and reuse, collection and recycling. A certain key role is extended, the extended producer responsibility for new textiles in accordance with the waste hierarchy. We need to create incentives for textiles to be designed in such a way that they can actually be reused, so they are able to stay in a closed loop cycle. So as it has been mentioned already, a comprehensive textile strategy on a European scale needs to be is a very complex task, and we are really looking forward as European Parliament to make up to this, because we know how important the sustainable textile sector is. And this is where I will stop my contribution, and I'm very excited to listen to the debate. And I like to say that we should start together a fashion revolution based on the systematic shift we need in the industry to really have change when it comes about sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bergkamp, and for explaining sort of the importance of recycling targets. I think that they are important across all recycling, but particularly possibly for fashion, as we're looking at really bringing in recycling across the whole board. Thank you to you and to all our keynote speakers today. We now turn to our debate on how textiles can become a circular industry. As I mentioned, Ms. Zonfleet and Ms. Rincon-Ivana will be staying with us for our debate. They are joined by Jonas Ada Hansen, Public Affairs Director at Global Fashion Agenda, the foremost leadership forum for industry collaboration on sustainability in fashion. In this role, he leads government affairs, policy and related stakeholder engagement, and the creation of impactful industry commitments on a regional and international level. We are also joined by Valeria Botta, Program Manager at Environmental Coalition on Standards, or ECOS, focusing on textiles and microplastics. She has 10 years experience in EU advocacy and a background in international and European studies. Thank you all for joining us. I'd like to remind our audience that they can leave their questions in our Q&A box at the right of your screen, and please indicate to whom your question is addressed. Now I'd like to invite our two new panelists to start with a brief introduction on their position on textiles and the circular economy. Mr. Ada Hansen, if you would like to go first, you have the floor.
Thanks so much. My name is Jonas, and I'll be brief. Maybe just a quick introduction on Global Fashion Agenda. We're an international Copenhagen-based non-profit organization that aims to guide fashion leaders around the world to make sustainability a strategic priority, and including, of course, in there also circularity. We are basically on a mission to bridge the gap between sustainability and fashion by convening and mobilizing the international fashion industry. We are behind the largest annual event on sustainability in fashion called the Copenhagen Fashion Summit, and we annually publish also Fashion Leaders Guide to Sustainability called the Fashion CEO Agenda. Thanks so much, EuRIC, for having me on board on the recycling talks, and also thank you, EuRIC, for putting a spotlight on the industry. Hopefully more to come in the future. So overall at GFA, we subscribe to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation vision for a circular economy for fashion and textile. Basically a circular economy for fashion where products are used more, used for longer time, including the focus on durability, but also emotional longevity is a part of this new business models that can help extend the life of products, but also that products are made to be made again. So basically focusing on, designed for disassembly, for example, designed for recycling, but also the move away from landfilling and incineration. And finally, of course, products that are made from safe and recycled materials. So move away from harmful substances, the effective use of resources, etc., etc. And also we have another vision specifically focused on how to also work with policymakers in this field around circular fashion and textile, because together with the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, the Federation of European Sporting Goods Industries, Textile Exchange, and the ZEC, the Zero Discharge of Harmful Chemicals, we are working within the Policy Hub to really unite the apparel and footwear industry to speak in one voice and propose policies that accelerate the circular practices. Because we need to move faster as an industry, and we need to increase collaboration with policymakers, recyclers, investors, and other important stakeholders. But particular policymakers and recyclers, which is also the focus for our discussion here today. We need to transition to a sustainable and circular model. It's clear that this requires a systemic change, and hence also a new legal framework as we see it. So we're also extremely happy to see that the textile industry is being appointed sort of focus industry status in the Circular Economy Action Plan. Because, as many of you already know, we've heard some of the facts, and some of the facts, well, yeah, we can discuss whether they are easy to find on the internet when you quickly Google impact of the fashion and textile industry, and which one of them actually are true once you dive into them. So a lot of talk about facts and factoids, but that's another discussion. But I mean, it's clear that we have a huge impact as an industry, and so we need to speed up the pace. And I mean, you've already heard about the economic benefits. I'm not going to go into those details, but they're clearly there. And I think it's just important to mention that a lot of brands and retailers within the industry, but also manufacturers, have really initiated the process of redesigning their products, life cycles, complexities. However, complexities around changing the linear model have really slowed down the movement towards circularity, because it is very complex. It's not easy, and certainly the pandemic has not made it easier. But that should not be an excuse, because unless the whole industry acts now, the industry really, basically, I mean, the linear model currently within the industry risks pushing past planetary boundaries. So, I mean, really in response to COVID, the pandemic, we have encouraged companies to work within their value chain, work with their supply chain partners to really identify how companies can go on a pathway towards circularity. And just, one quick example where we're working directly with a number of brands and retailers and their supply chain partners, manufacturers, specifically focused on Bangladesh, working with BGMEA, one of the national key organizations, to really establish a system that will collect and sort textile waste right at the manufacturing stage, to avoid those between 10 to 20% of textile waste in the cut and sew process, and really trying to increase the recycling capacity on the ground, and eventually, of course, make more recycled content available on the market that is ready to go into products instead of using virgin materials. So again, in that specific example, also policymakers are really key in order to help facilitate the agenda forward. And I mean, as already mentioned, and this is my final comment, the industry is already doing a lot. I mean, we've been driving specific projects and commitments, setting targets for the industry. The MacArthur Foundation's Make Fashion Circular, PACE, Fashion for Good, Textile 2030. I mean, I could go on. The list is long, with a lot of existing industry initiatives. There is one issue, though, that we tend to see, is that it's many around the same, let's say around 100 to 150 companies that are very active in all of these ongoing initiatives. And of course, that's not right. That's not really enough to be able to talk about a whole industry. So we need that further partnership and collaboration with key stakeholders, and really policymakers and recyclers are key here. So engaging with policymakers and recyclers to really develop collection, sorting, recycling infrastructures, as well as enhancing and incentivizing mechanisms to scale circular fashion systems, really is a key, and including also, of course, the move of waste at a global scale is crucial. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Reiner Hansen. I think we're going to hear about a systematic change a lot today, so it's really interesting to hear your take on that. And also we have Ms. Botter, welcome. Please could you give us your take on this topic as well, and then we can get to our Q&A.
Yes, thanks, Kira. And first of all, I mean, thank you very much, EuRIC, Emmanuel, Julia, and Mariska for having us here today. Indeed, very timely topic. As you know, the Sustainable Product Policy Initiative consultation is open. Thank you very much for all the opening talk, Maria and Delara. Was very inspiring to see so many of, let's say, the key topics already covered by you in your introductory speech. I mean, from our side, ECOS is an NGO and is based in Brussels. It has a global reach. We have been working for over 20 years on eco-design policies and implementation. So, of course, when it comes to where to look for a solution, we tend to focus from the start and from the beginning. We have published a report a couple of weeks ago that is called Durable, Repairable, and Mainstream, and how eco-design can make our textile circular. Have a look. We have quite a lot of ideas, and happy to discuss those in more details during the discussion. Of course, for us, if we want a sustainable product to become the norm in the EU, the primary focus would be to remove the unnecessary, inefficient, toxic, and polluting products from the EU market first. Then complemented with better consumer information, of course. So very happy to hear, Maria, that you have pointed out the empower consumer, the green claims, etc., etc. And at the same time, we need to slow down the loop. So we all talk about the circularity of on how to push this very linear industry towards more circularity. So we need to slow down the loop, so reduce the use of resources and prolong the useful life of textile products. Of course, I mean, happy to have MEP Burkhardt here today, because I mean the holistic vision of this is very important. So as you know, MEPs have called in February for binding consumption target. So that would kind of frame it nicely to slowing down the loop. and at the same time, so the need for material and consumption footprint reduction target for us are quite key. And then we need to close the loop, so enable the recycling of products and material, of course, keeping in mind the waste hierarchy and favoring, of course, the value retention. I'm very happy to hear also from Mariska, I mean, the reuse part and kind of having reuse targets will be crucial in order to have this value being reflected and this waste hierarchy being reflected as well. Because we strongly believe that mandatory minimum requirements are essential to begin the transformation of the textile sector towards circularity with design for durability. So both physical, functional of how a garment and how a textile product is put together, but also emotional. So when you actually design clothes that you want to use over and over again and hopefully pass it on to the next generation and reuse and share with your friends. So what we also have in mind is more of a product as a system, so that it's kind of, yeah, the sharing economy, the rental, etc., etc. So the design for durability may increase the lifespan of textile, reducing textile waste and overall the use of virgin material and chemicals, because of course textile industry is a huge they use a lot of course of chemicals, and that needs to be tackled, especially hazardous chemicals. And more durable products with longer lifetime are associated overall with higher environmental benefits. We hear it from everybody. So of course then it has to be coupled with reuse, repair and recycling. Kira, you came up very big on my screen. That's because my time is up.
Yeah, so if we could get, but
yeah.
Thank you so much for explaining that, and yeah, going over what everyone said so far, and it's really key.
Can I just add one last point, because we are talking about recycling, we are talking about waste. Maria said quite a lot of things about the global supply chain. I mean, we are part of a coalition of civil society organizations, so please do take care about the environmental side, but also the social aspect to it. So very happy to hear the due diligence chapter will be kept in this overarching umbrella. And then for the waste shipments, I mean, we should be able to deal with our own waste and only ship it under very, very strict condition, and not to kind of export our way of consumption.
Thank you. We have a brilliant question in our Q&A to kick us off from Alan Wheeler. How do we become circular and also ensure that reusable items are kept in use instead of being diverted into recycling? I've seen so-called upcycling, where perfectly good items are being cut up to be refashioned. That is not circular. Ms. Bottom, maybe you can start with that, and then we'll hand it around to other panelists.
Sure, thanks, Kira. Thank you very much for this question. I mean, of course, what I was hinting earlier about our reuse target is because, of course, when it comes to products that we do not want, and for example, we give to charity, or with the sorting and the separate sorting that will be put out, we need to support the reuse sector and prevent all of these huge pile of textile products that are in very good and well conditioned to be first reused and then recycled. Hope it covers. So we need mandatory targets for use.
Ms. Sunfleet, do you want to come in on that question?
Yeah, thank you, Kira. Actually, I do. I think what we must remember is that in the end, the reuse market works because there's a business model behind that. It has worked for over 100 years. I mean, it's nothing new, really. The problem is with recycling that there is no end market, no demand for recycled content. So the economics in recycling do not work. So if we want to move from a linear to a more circular model, we have to make sure that they start working. Just trying to answer part of Alan's question there as well. A circular model is not per definition a sustainable model. In the end, if we want to make textiles circular, it will require a lot of energy and a lot of effort, and in the end have an environmental impact. So a sustainable model is when we follow the steps in the waste hierarchy. I completely agree with Valeria there. This is the only way to tackle the textile waste problem. We have to always take out and reuse for as long as possible whatever can be reused before we move on to recycling. So that is very important. And yes, I also need to stress there again that we have to make the economics in textile, so or in textile recycling. So the only way we're going to do that is if we know clearly from the next users or the manufacturers, let's put it that way, what they need from this recycling process as their feedstock, as their input. This is the way we can move towards more circularity.
Can I add a comment there?
Of course.
Kira, now just wanted to also follow up. I think there's maybe a couple of learnings. We don't have the perfect model yet, but I mentioned also our current ongoing project in Bangladesh, where we're not just looking at recycling and collection and sorting of post-production waste, but also looking at some of the dead stock and overstock that has basically been a result of the pandemic, but is not as such a new thing for the industry. I think there's potentially a couple of learnings we can actually take out of that, focusing on remanufacturing. Of course, this is also, again, it has to be economically viable and is at the current stage not something that is calculated into the way we manufacture our products. But I think there are some opportunities that the industry is currently looking at in terms of how remanufacturing can actually play a more important role, so that we don't end up where Alan Wheeler exactly is also mentioning, that perfectly well-functioning goods are actually sent to incineration or landfill or recycling, where they could be used. Maybe they just need a quick touch-up, and therefore could be done through some remanufacturing, but we need to build the capacity for that. And I think there is ongoing activities going in that direction within the industry.
Kia, if I may, to intervene?
Of course. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I wanted to come back up for a second on this point on the sustainability of circular economy. I really think that circular economy is sustainable because, as I was trying to explain at the beginning during my keynote, we see circular economy like a model that encompasses benefits, not only environmental, but also boosting competitiveness of industry. And we see this because, for instance, applying resource efficiency practices for businesses, you can reduce the needs for input on raw materials, for instance, water. But we also see circular economy as contributing strongly to the social agenda. It was mentioned by Valeria, but I also see it here in Europe. The social economy is very much linked to these models of repair and reuse, and this is a direct contribution that the circular economy can make to it. And I wanted to also come back to the point on how do we make the business case for recycling of textiles. I think we need to act on both supply and demand sides. So for instance, I see that setting minimum requirements for the uptake of recycled content on one hand, so boosting the uptake of recycled content on the demand side, but also removing barriers for the recycling of textiles, and also acting on improving the circulation of waste. This is something that is one of the objectives of the waste shipment regulation that is currently being, the Commission is preparing the revision, and it will be presented after the summer. It's important to really remove these barriers for the uptake of both recycling material and recycling technologies.
I just want to follow up with a question we had from Eric Kurtz. with you, Mr. Nkoliovana. Will the upcoming sustainability textile strategy consider specific EPR reuse or recycling targets, for instance, on carpets and tiles, or rather horizontal circularity requirements for the whole sector?
I think it's a very complete question that touches upon many of different initiatives. So I don't think I can reply with a single yes or no. The revision of the waste legislation and the waste framework directive already establishes that the Commission will look into the feasibility of setting targets for reuse and recycling of textiles, if I'm not wrong, by December 2024. So the Commission will take the necessary steps to prepare the assessment of the need of indeed setting these targets. Another thing is that businesses and consumers can engage to commit to reuse more. So it's another work strand that I think Jonas with the Global Fashion Agenda commitments are working a little bit on that. Regarding EPR schemes, the Waste Framework Directive already established minimum requirements that will set at EU level. We know that there's EPR schemes that are working for textile in the case of France. We are also seeing that there's interest from all the member states to set up these schemes that will be based on these minimum horizontal requirements that were put forward in the Waste Framework Directive. In the next year, we will need to see if an EPR for textile makes sense specifically, or if we need to act to set up one at the EU level. It's a little bit too early to come with a definitive answer, but it's indeed part of the Waste Framework Directive, and it's something that we will look in the horizon. Yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Johansson, perhaps you'd like to come back to that. And also we have a question for you from Erica Van Don. How can we overcome the immense disconnect between brands and producers on the one hand and textile collectors and sorters in Europe on the other?
Right, thank you. So let me come back on that question, just following up on Maria, in terms of what we created with the 2020 circular fashion commitment that we created back in 2007, actually, was 2017. It would have been great to do it in 7, but we basically created a way for fashion brands, both small and medium-sized, but also larger ones, to start setting targets, basically, and around 4 specific areas. So on design, on collection, on resale, and also on recycling, and really sort of trying to take brands and retailers by the hand in terms of what does it take to start up an own collection scheme, if that makes sense for the company. I mean, what does it take to actually look at educating designers, for example, in terms of handling design strategies internally, so that you can actually aim for more circular products at the end. And so this was a way to kickstart and make sure that the industry could take a collaborative effort, and we managed to actually get 12.5% of the global industry measured by turnover to engage in this. And is that enough? No, absolutely not. I mean, we need many more companies and bigger percentage of the industry to engage. But that was the start. We kind of got to a good position in 2020, and I think there are, as I also mentioned before, I mean, there are already a lot of initiatives focusing on this, but we still need to get more companies on board, so that it's not only the usual suspects that participate in all the different initiatives. On the specific question, I think it's, I mean, basically, the question being how to overcome the disconnect between brands and manufacturers on the one side and textile collectors and sorters in Europe on the other hand. I think, it's first of all, we need to make sure that there is much more conversation between the different parties. And I think we at Global Fashion Agenda have started to initiate and see the importance in actually working with that that collaboration. And certainly also this is something that we've done through the policy hub that I was mentioning before. You know, the collaboration between Global Fashion Agenda, Sustainable Apparel Coalition, Federation of European Sporting Goods Industries, Textile Exchange, and ZEHC. We've come together to not just within that group, but also expanding that group to speak with a number of stakeholders within recycling and sorting and so on, to start the dialogue and to basically say that we need to act as one system. You know, a lot of people talk about systemic change, but let's make sure that we get that system together in one room, which can be difficult because it's quite a complex system and quite a lot of players. But I think we've started that with a particular focus on EPR, and see if we can actually align some of the thinking that exists already in, you know, different pockets, but actually align it, and it requires time, unfortunately. So yes, there's still more conversation needed, but I think we've come a long way, and so, you know, I think, and also one other element just to add to that, I think certainly brands, manufacturers, and then of course also textile collectors and sorters, but certainly also the municipalities are important in this connection. So yeah, thanks.
And something we have a question for you. When exporting secondhand clothes, how can it be ensured that they don't contain non-wearable products, even if they are sorted beforehand?
Okay, that's a very good question, in fact, and I'd like to explain a little bit more about that. As I said in my keynote opening, a reusable item is only reusable when it's actually marketable. So when we talk about this sorting process, it's really an essential step in preparing for reuse. It is a very detailed sorting process in most cases, and it's also done by professional knowledgeable sorters. And it's actually, they're constantly searching for the balance between what is found in the unsorted textiles and what is the demand in the global secondhand markets. If I just look at the sorting process in our sorting plants, the items are sorted into 400 different categories and also up to 5 different qualities. So there's a very meticulous process that is balancing what we find with the demand. And very simply said, I mean, the textiles that are exported to worldwide secondhand markets, they are exported in most cases to wholesalers. If there are any unusable or unwearable items found inside, in the end, the sorting plant will lose clients over that because clients pay for the textiles. And if they find items in there that they cannot sell again or use again or wear again, then you will have a problem with that. So yeah, I hope that sort of answers the question.
Thank you. And next we have a question for Ms. Botter from Helmut Maurer. How do you think we should organize textile waste prevention?
Yes, I mean, that's the big elephant anyway, when I was talking about slowing down the loop and reducing the resources, and kind of just to go back to a place. It's really important that indeed the designers are trained so that they when they do design products, they have this longevity in mind, and the quality of the product that are put on the market are fine for use, and then ultimately fine for recycling. So you were saying prevention of waste. I mean, this is really a big one. I mean, we should all wear our clothes longer, having them for long, and just use them more. Give them to your friends, swap them, and mend them and repair them, just make sure that, I mean, we're here, we have all our clothes on our, I mean, we all wear clothes. Let's make the most out of the one that we already have. I do think that there are really a lot of things, but circularity, there is recycling, as has been said by many, and that's designing for circularity is one of the options, but there are really design for durability and design for reuse that should also be taken into account.
Thank you. And I know as the smallest person in my friendship group, I have often ended up with the second-hand clothes.
Sorry, Kira, sorry, I just had one little point to add for the recycled material, etc. For us, it's very important that comes from closed loop recycling, because we know, I mean, there is quite a lot of buzz around on PET bottle being reused to produce fleece, etc., etc. We have to be mindful that there is as well here a very comprehensive strategy that needs to be tackled. So PET bottle, if you take them out from the plastic, let's say, coherent waste streams, when you put them in the market as textile, what we have agreed is that there is really not a lot of opportunity for recycling, as there are so many roadblocks that need to be lifted. But if you do put them there, then the additional PET bottles that could come out of this PET bottle won't happen, and they just ended up in textile that then would be taken out of the market.
Thank you. And we have time for 2 quick questions before we wrap up. So the first to Ms. Rincon-Liavana from Sarah Marshall: how do we ensure we take the public with us, people who want new fashion without knowing or caring about the environmental and social costs? And what can we do financially to help support manufacturers to reduce pollution, for instance, water pollution?
Well, it's 2 different type of questions. I will pick up on the first one. I think that addressing fast fashion and slowing down, as Valeria was saying, has a lot to do with waste prevention. And the focus on waste prevention, reducing waste, or keeping the products in use for longer, and changing as well the mindset of consumers that look into reusing instead of buying a new one. It's all part of a comprehensive change of mindset that the Circular Economy Action Plan introduces as the Sustainable Product Policy Framework that encompasses, on one hand, design for sustainability, and on the other, empowering consumer to make better choices and to tackle this type of controversy when deciding what to buy. And it also looks in sustainable production processes to make sure that during production the emissions are reduced. We have in the European Union the industrial emissions directive that apply to textile facilities, to textile installations, and that is currently being reviewed to increase the contribution to the objective of the European Green Deal. That will also increase the contribution of these installations to reduce pollution. I think I have more or less covered both points, or I hope at least.
Thank you. And our final question goes to you, Ms. Dunfleet, from Maria Teresa Scrivani. Is mechanical recycling possible, or do you foresee a need for chemical recycling? And which is the most suitable for textiles?
Okay, again, a very good question. In fact, mechanical recycling is possible, and it is already happening. And that was the 30% more or less that I was talking about. 15% of that is for the wiper industry, and another 15% you could say is shredded and used, as I explained, in isolation materials and such. I'm by far not a technical expert on textile recycling, but I do know why it is difficult at the moment. And I think at the moment, I think it will stay difficult. It has to do with the fact that most of our clothes are multi-layered. I mean, if you look at your average winter coat or even just a blazer jacket, you will see multiple layers, and those 2 layers are not of the same material. Another problem is that if we separate the 2 layers and we look what is inside, there's often a mix of fibers in there. The mix of fibers is also difficult because that also means that you now have to separate these fibers. You need to isolate them in order for them to be recycled. At the moment, the main focus is on the cotton fiber because that is also has the largest environmental impact on virgin production, and also polyester fibers. So there's quite a few good processes that are being developed at the moment. But you know, it's unfortunately our clothes are not all just cotton or polyester. There are many more, so that makes it very challenging from a technical point of view. It also stresses the need for funding for innovation. And in my belief, I think with the upcoming strategy on textiles, with the legislation and with the EPR systems that are emerging in various EU member states, within now 5 years, we'll be looking at a different playing field when it comes to the textile value chain. And I really hope that playing field will also incorporate a more circular model.
Thank you. I think we don't really think about what we're buying. We don't really look at the label when we buy it, but obviously there are really complex recycling procedures for it. Thank you all for your questions, and thank you to our panelists for answering them. We have time for a couple of minutes for each of our speakers to say what they're going to take away from today's talk. Ms. Potter, let's start with you. You have 2 minutes. What has stood out for you?
This seems to be quite a lot of very good first steps that have been taken, and as you see from the discussion today, there is a lot of stakeholders that are active, and we're sharing knowledge and try to get to some sort of solution, because this is really an issue and it is a pressing issue, and we need to really change the linear nature of this industry towards a more circular one. There has been so many things that have been quoted today, with be that the Sustainable Product Policy Initiative, the Textile Strategy, the Green Claims, EPR. I mean, these are all the due diligence, all part of a puzzle, and they all need to move towards, let's say, a future where we will just use our things for longer and mend them and have the externality, both the social and the environmental externalities, embedded in the products themselves, so that we understand when we have products what they do mean. And yes, and indeed, I mean, green claims, this is also something that is a big one for me overall. There was, I mean, and the destruction of goods, I mean, we need to prevent the destruction of goods, to ban it, because applied with a digital product passport, that would provide us some kind of sort of visibility and incentive to tackle the overproduction. So that, for me, I mean, thank you very much for having us, and this seems to be very timely and kind of a first conversation for many more to come, and looking forward to that.
Thank you, Ms. Button. Mr. Ada Hansen, what will you take away from today's event?
First of all, I think it's amazing to witness that the broader recycling industry is now focusing on the fashion and textile industry. I know that pockets of the recycling industry have done that for ages, I was about to say, but I think it is crucial for the broader recycling industry to really see the opportunities in exactly working also together with the industry in creating the right products, but also the right processes and systems in order to go for a circular system. And I think it's really encouraging to see how policymakers, I mean, certainly the European Commission, but also the European Parliament, have really understood also the importance of focusing on this industry, and not just because we, as an industry, certainly have a lot of challenges and also need support from policymakers, but also because consumers, to a large extent, are demanding this. And consumers also are citizens and therefore also elect the people in the parliament. So I think this is an interesting dimension where we see more and more players come together, finding a shared route towards this vision. And so I can just confirm that the industry is also on board. As I mentioned, there might be still a way to go to have more front runners, more leaders within the industry. We see a lot of usual suspects, but to really get a lot more industry players into the room to actually also participate, and then certainly for the industry to speak with one voice, also towards policymakers, towards recyclers, and of course that's also what and why the Policy Hub is put in the place.
Thank you, Ms. Sonfleet. What will be your takeaways from today?
Well, first of all, thanks Jonas, thanks Valeria, thanks Maria, and also thank you, Mrs. Burkhardt. A lot has been said today, and it's really great to see all the different points of view coming forward. And I think it's very valuable to have these talks together, because that's also what I mentioned in my opening speech. This dialogue, this communication between all the different stakeholders is really essential. For what Ms. Burkhardt said also earlier, I think it's also good to mention that it is being seen that the quality of the textiles that are collected has really deteriorated, and this means that now fewer textiles are fit to be reused or reworn. So Valeria was stressing that also, and we also stress that for textiles. Durability in design is really essential to return. We need to move away from the fast fashion model and make sure that the clothes that come onto the market are durable and can be used, worn again as long as possible, because every piece of clothing that can be worn again means that there's one piece of clothing less produced or needs to be produced. The design for recycling, eco-design, is very important. We talked a little bit about mechanical recycling that's already happening. I hadn't mentioned, but I can still do that now, that it would be very interesting to see a list of showstoppers there, because there are, if you have non-textile materials in the textiles that go for mechanical recycling, they can really hamper the whole process and make it in fact impossible. So we also need to think about that, or we, the designers, have to think about that in the design, but we need to tell them. Last but not least, incentivize the use of recycled content. I cannot stress that enough. We need to make the economics work in textile recycling in order to make our textile chain more circular. So thank you all.
Thank you. And Ms. Rincon-Liavani, you have the honor of closing our debate today. What have been the main points for you?
Thank you very much. It's indeed an honor, and I see this first talk as an opportunity to continue discussing on open challenges. Many have been mentioned: how to slow down consumption of textiles, of new textiles, how to improve the quality of the textiles that reach reuse markets, to ensure that reuse is possible and there's an economic feasibility of it. What we need to improve mechanical recycling of textile. Do we need to act at the design phase? It's more a question of technologies. What's the role of chemical recycling? So there's still a lot of ongoing conversations that I think we still need in order to make this shift towards circularity happen. I see upcoming the opportunity to continue these discussions in the framework and in the context of the consultation activities of the preparation of the initiative on textiles. That is, they are upcoming. More information will be shared in the Have Your Say portal of the European Commission. And I think that beyond all the initiatives that have been mentioned, the Sustainable Product Initiative, Green Claim, Due Diligence, Recyclability, Recycled Content, I think this is a joint endeavor. And only by co-creating together the future and the vision of the textile sector we want is that we will make possible to have a real circular textile sector and ecosystem. So with that, I think I would like to finish.
Thank you, and thank you to all our panelists today. Thank you to our audience for your wonderful questions. Apologies we couldn't get around to all of them. I will now pass over to Emmanuel Kachikis, the Secretary General of EuRIC, for the final remarks. I've been Kira Taylor. Thank you for joining us, and Mr. Kachikis, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me properly. Yes? Okay. First of all, I really want to thank all the speakers and the audience for these very interesting recyclers talks. Those are the second ones that we are indeed having. And I think when we are reaching the end of those panels, we all will feel that we need at least 1 extra hour to go through all the questions that we see. So I think we would be extremely happy to try to follow up with some of them if there is any need, so you can always reach out to us. I also want to stress that we do not have a choice to move towards a circular economy. It's an absolute must, both in terms of demand from society, in terms of demand to basically preserve the environment, decouple resource use from growth, and actually reach the climate targets. We have no planet B, so we really have to do it, and it has to make sense. It comes from for the consumers first and foremost. It has to make sense from an industrial value chain approach, because I think we are now going away or trying to move away from a crisis, and it's absolutely essential that we look at the opportunities that moving towards a circular economy brings in terms of economic growth, but sustainable economic growth. And I think if we today are speaking about the circular economy here for textiles, is primarily because so far we didn't manage to do that. We don't start from scratch. I had the pleasure to visit a lot of facilities who are doing a wonderful job in collecting, sorting, preparing for use and recycling textile fibers and second-hand textiles. But at the same, on the same hand, it's really important to scale up. And I think what we all ask, wherever we come from, whether we come from the angle of the textiles value chain, or whether we come from the angle of ECOS and other NGOs with whom we're working, is to have the signal, the price signal, the consumer signals, the right framework to enable that transition to happen. So without trying to sum up all the interesting debates that have been said, I just want to stress, I think, 2 or 3 elements. First, to have the signals, it's really important to make sure that the positive externalities that sustainable activities, be it preparation for reuse or recycling, bring into society, that requires, for instance, real incentives, but also targets for reuse and for recycled content, to make sure that we are all aiming towards the same direction, that we have those framework conditions in place to enable investments and scale up. And at the same hand, we obviously need to make sure that consumers are aware of sustainable products versus non-sustainable products, so we can go and responsibilize consumers who are asking for that to make the right choices. And in that, I mean, those 2 key elements, I think, for instance, that EPR has a key role to play to make sure that we also make sure that we bring all the different elements of the value chains from design to use phase to end of life phase. And this is also extremely relevant for textiles. I don't want, obviously, to go more into the details. I think it was really interesting to open up that discussion today. We as EuRIC Textile, we strive, and the companies that we represent through our federation and member companies, we strive actually on a day-to-day basis for decades to go, for the past decades and decades to come, to have a more circular textiles industry as a whole. But we also know that without those market signal and framework conditions, we won't be able to do that. So we really actually call for the Commission to release its textile strategy. We also call for continuous stakeholder engagement with the textile industry, to whom we are part, and with NGOs, to make sure that at the end of the day, we try to make the best, because, as I said in my introductory, we really need to make it happen in this industry as a whole. Thank you. Thank you very much. And just as a concluded statement, stay tuned, because we'll have more services to come, and they will be duly advertised in the coming days on EuRIC website. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation, for that talk, and for all the insights you could give us. And thank you all for attending, and please tune back in. We've got Emmanuel Katrakis live with us in the afternoon at 4 o'clock, around that. It's exactly 4:15. So please tune back in. And in the meantime, we will have of course, a lot of other webinars at 11:50. No, I'm sorry. At 11:15, we will start again with René Drescher from Resify, who will talk a little bit more about textile recycling and their platform they've built exactly for that. This will be on German, so please tune in. And yes, you can use the rest of the time to look over the booth. So please head over to the expo on our website, and we've got a lot of nice people there. You can go into a live chat. You can get yourself a few appointments with them directly for a quick 10-15 minute talk, and of course find a lot of information on recycling, machines, circular economy, and all these things. So thank you very much and have a good day. Bye bye.